All right, today we're going to talk about some weird ecosystems. Life is really odd. It's very pervasive. Anywhere on Earth, one of the questions we had in the last one was, how rare is life? Well, based on Earth, anywhere life can exist, it does. And it exists in some really weird places you wouldn't normally think. So I want to look at three of the weirdest ecosystems on Earth. So, the first is a place I would love to visit. Only a few hundred people have ever visited. You actually have to get permission to go in. There are tour companies that can do it, but it's very expensive. Um, it's called the Son Doog Cave in Vietnam. It was only discovered a few years ago, um, but it's a cave so big that it actually has its own rainforest. So there's an area in the cave you actually have to walk in. It takes almost a week to get there, but where the roof has collapsed, it actually creates a giant, there's a ecosystem, a rainforest, completely underground. And because it's got the sun and it's got water, there's a river that runs through the cave, which is actually what created the cave, you have all the necessary elements for life. So these are actual pictures. This is not, and you have ferns and jungle plants growing inside. People have seen monkeys, birds, snakes, and this is 200 meters under the Earth's surface in this cave. There are hornbills, flying foxes, swifts. There are immense, huge trees that grow in the areas where there's enough sunlight to protect them for it. So they're protected by but they still have everything they need. In some of the areas without light, you get albino species that have adapted to living in total darkness. So you have an entire ecosystem in this one cave that exists nowhere else on Earth, completely undisturbed. Now, we want to talk about undisturbed. How about 5 million years of undisturbed? So this one is really weird. It's called the Moval Cave, and it was discovered a few years ago in Romania. Now, the weird thing is, it's only 240 meters wide, but it's completely sealed off. There's no transfer of gases or water or anything from this cave to the rest of the Earth. In fact, when they look at the isotopes are different than any other water anywhere on Earth, and it's literally a time capsule from 5.5 million years ago. Now, that's not even the weirdest part. The weirdest part is the atmosphere is actually poisonous hydrogen sulfide. The water is actually extremely sulfuric. There's no light, and the oxygen level in it is actually only 10%, not 20% like we're breathing right now. So if you were actually to go to visit this, you would need oxygen. Otherwise, you would not be able to breathe here. But even there, we found life. So in the Moval Cave, we found, I don't want to hide this cute little guy, leeches, insects. 48 species are actually alive in this cave, including 33 like this worm, this leech, that are found nowhere else in the entire world except in this 240-meter cave. In fact, the scientists, what we're confused by is, where does the energy come from? There's no light, there's no water, there's no nutrients flowing into this cave. How can life exist? And it turns out, they think there's a frothy bacteria on the surface of the water that gets energy from the CO2 and from the sulfur, and that provides the start of the food chain that feeds the primary consumers, which then feed the secondary consumers, which have actually created this ecosystem in a cave that has had no new energy for 5 million years. So it's absolutely fascinating that life, even there, even though it's simple insect-based life, still exists. All right, let's go to the other extreme, underwater. We have these things called hydrothermal vents. So deep in the ocean where no light can reach, we still have animals. There's still life. There's a lot of life. So again, the question is, where does the energy come from? Well, it turns out there are animals and there are plants and bacteria that have learned to feed on these vents. So these hydrothermal vents are kind of like geysers on Earth, where there's water superheated by the magma that flows underneath, causing these vents of typically incredibly sulfurous, very hot water, up to 400 degrees Celsius, to rise from the ocean floor. And where these vents happen, animals, plants, organisms have learned how to use that using a process called chemosynthesis to actually make energy. So instead of photosynthesis, where you get the sun, chemosynthesis uses the hot water saturated with dissolved chemicals. The bacteria absorb those, the hydrogen sulfide and the carbon dioxide, and use that energy to oxidize the sulfur to make organic molecules, which then grow, reproduce, and are eaten or hosted in other animals. So basically, instead of using sunlight for energy, they're using the heat and the chemicals from these superheated vents to actually produce energy. And once you've got producers, you can have everything else. So once you've got the producers, you've got these weird plants and bacteria that can actually grow on these vents and use the chemicals from the vents and the heat. Now you have a food source to get your primary consumers. Once you got primary consumers, you can have secondary consumers. Once you've got secondary consumers, you can have top predators. And this entire ecosystem, instead of being based on plants and sunlight, is based on these weird plants and bacteria that actually use superheated sulfur and carbon dioxide to produce their energy, which then gives us some of the weirdest animals there are anywhere in the world that basically don't have any light at all. So in areas where there is literally no light, you can actually still have life. So what I want you to get from this lesson is basically life exists everywhere on Earth. And life, to quote a scientist in a movie about dinosaurs, finds a way. Everywhere life could exist on Earth, it does. You can't go anywhere on Earth that there is no life at all. All right, so ecosystems, again, as long as you've got a producer and a source of energy, you can have everything else. All right, that's the end of the lesson today. Remember, the quote for the thing for this is to ask me a question, and I'll try and answer it. I'll try and research if I don't know and answer it for you. All right, thanks very much. Bye-bye.